Hey guys, tonight we're going to do something very gentle, very slow, and very Roman. So dim the lights, put your phone face down, let your brain loosen its grip on modern problems like unread emails and whatever Rome did to deserve this much attention. Tonight, we begin with the rise and fall of the Roman Empire, which is a fancy way of saying a very long story about power, paranoia, family drama, bad decisions, and men who absolutely should not have been in charge of anything larger than a goat. This is a bedtime history. Nothing too exciting, nothing too intense. Just a steady stroll through centuries of ambition slowly eating itself alive. So let's drift back, way back, to a time when Italy was mostly forests, hills, and people arguing over whose sheep were whose. According to Roman tradition, the city of Rome was founded in 753 BCE by two brothers named Romulus and Remus. They were raised by a wolf, because of course they were. Already we're starting strong. Now, anytime a civilization explains its origin story with, "so there was this wolf," you know accuracy is going to be flexible. But Romans loved this story. Two abandoned twins, divine heritage, sibling rivalry, and eventually murder. Romulus and Remus decided to found a city. They argued about where it should be. They argued about who should rule it. They consulted birds. Yes, birds. Augury was a thing. You watch birds and interpret their vibes. Eventually, Romulus killed Remus, which feels like an aggressive way to settle a zoning dispute, but it did set the tone for Roman politics going forward. Rome, from the very beginning, was a place where family disagreements ended badly. Romulus became the first king of Rome. He ruled over a small, rough settlement of farmers, refugees, escaped slaves, and men who definitely had been kicked out of other cities for reasons they did not fully explain. Rome did not have enough women. This became a problem, so the Romans solved it in the calmest way possible. They kidnapped women from neighboring tribes during a festival. This was called the Rape of the Sabine Women. Rape here meaning abduction, but still not great branding. And yet, somehow, Rome survived. It grew, slowly, awkwardly, with a lot of fighting. Rome was ruled by kings for about 250 years. There were 7 of them, according to tradition. Some were good, some were bad, and the last one was so bad that Romans collectively decided, okay, never again. His name was Tarquin the Proud, which tells you everything you need to know. Tarquin ruled like a tyrant. He ignored the Senate. He ruled by fear. And his son committed a particularly awful crime against a noblewoman named Lucretia. Lucretia killed herself out of shame. Her death sparked outrage, and Rome finally snapped. The monarchy was overthrown, the kings were expelled, and Rome swore, dramatically, that it would never, ever have a king again. Which is adorable, because what they actually did was invent a system where a handful of extremely wealthy men took turns pretending they weren't kings. Welcome to the Roman Republic. The Republic was built on checks and balances, in theory. There were 2 consuls elected every year, so no one man could hold power too long. There was a Senate made up of elite families. There were assemblies of citizens. It was all very orderly, on paper. In reality, Roman politics was a blood sport conducted by men in togas who smiled politely while planning each other's downfalls. Rome spent the next few centuries doing what it did best, expanding, fighting, absorbing enemies, stealing their gods, and insisting it was all very civilized. The Roman army became the backbone of the Republic, disciplined, organized, relentless. Roman soldiers fought not just for glory, but for land and citizenship. Win a war, get a farm. Lose a war, get a funeral. This system worked surprisingly well. Rome conquered Italy, then it looked across the Mediterranean and thought, why not that too? Enter Carthage. Carthage was a wealthy, powerful city in North Africa. It had money, ships, trade networks, and confidence. Rome did not like that. Thus began the Punic Wars, 3 long, exhausting conflicts that slowly ground both civilizations down. The most famous Carthaginian was Hannibal. Yes, the elephant guy. Hannibal marched his army, elephants included, over the Alps to invade Italy, which is still one of the most unhinged military decisions in history. He won battle after battle, crushed Roman armies, terrified the Republic. For years, Romans lived with the knowledge that Hannibal was somewhere nearby, just existing, menacingly. And yet, Rome did not collapse. It adapted. It endured. Eventually, it took the war to Carthage itself. Carthage lost, then lost again. Then, in the Third Punic War, Rome destroyed it completely. They burned the city, sold the people into slavery, and, according to legend, salted the earth. Rome had won, but victory came with consequences. All right, settle back in. Nothing urgent is happening. Rome is only unraveling very slowly, which is perfect bedtime pacing. When we left off, Julius Caesar was very much dead, stabbed repeatedly by men who believed they were restoring liberty. They were wrong, but at least they were confident about it. The assassins expected applause, maybe a parade, possibly a thank you note from the Republic. Instead, Rome responded with confusion, riots, and an overwhelming sense of, okay, now what? Because killing Caesar did not bring back the old Republic. It just removed the one man everyone was afraid of. Caesar's funeral turned into a political spectacle. Mark Antony, Caesar's loyal general and occasional party animal, delivered a speech, a very emotional speech. A speech that gently reminded the crowd how generous Caesar had been, how many people he helped, how brutally he was murdered. The crowd became angry, then violent, then extremely Roman about it. The assassins fled the city. Meanwhile, a teenage boy was quietly reading Caesar's will. This boy was Gaius Octavius, later known as Octavian, later known as Augustus, but for now he was an 18-year-old with no military experience and a very famous dead uncle. Caesar had adopted Octavian as his son and named him heir, which surprised almost everyone, including Octavian. Octavian arrived in Rome looking calm, pale, and dangerously patient. He did not shout. He did not threaten. He smiled politely and began collecting allies. Mark Antony did not take him seriously, which would turn out to be a mistake, a very long, very expensive mistake. Rome now had 3 major power centers again: Antony, Octavian, and Lepidus, who was often forgotten because history decided he was boring. Together, they formed the second triumvirate. This one was official, legal, and far more violent than the first. They published proscriptions, lists of enemies to be killed, property seized, careers ended abruptly. One of the victims was Cicero, the famous orator, the man who loved the Republic deeply and loudly. His head and hands were nailed to the speaker platform in the Forum, which feels excessive, but Rome was going through some things. Eventually, the triumvirs defeated Caesar's assassins at the Battle of Philippi. Brutus and Cassius both died. The Republic died with them quietly off stage. Now the question was simple: who gets everything? Antony took the east, Octavian took the west, Lepidus got Africa, which was a polite way of sidelining him. Antony went east and met Cleopatra. Yes, that Cleopatra, Queen of Egypt, intelligent, charismatic, extremely done with Roman nonsense. Antony fell in love, or infatuation, or midlife crisis. Hard to say. He spent years in Egypt, adopted local customs, had children with Cleopatra, ignored Rome. Octavian stayed in Italy, played the long game, married strategically, divorced strategically, presented himself as the defender of Roman values. Slowly, carefully, he turned public opinion against Antony. Antony, he suggested, had gone native. He was under Cleopatra's influence. He wanted to rule Rome like an Eastern despot. This worked. In 31 BCE, Octavian and Antony faced off at the Battle of Actium, a naval battle, messy, confusing. Cleopatra fled. Antony followed. Not a great look. They both eventually committed suicide. Egypt became a Roman province. Octavian stood alone. Rome was exhausted. Decades of civil war had drained it. Octavian promised peace, stability, order. In 27 BCE, he did something very clever. He claimed he was restoring the Republic. He returned power to the Senate. He accepted, reluctantly, a collection of titles. One of them was Augustus, meaning the revered one. He was not a king, absolutely not. He was princeps, first citizen, and also, quietly, emperor. Augustus ruled for over 40 years, which is impressive and suspicious. He reorganized the army, created a professional bureaucracy, built roads, temples, aqueducts. He found Rome a city of brick and left it a city of marble, which sounds nice and expensive. He also exiled his own daughter for adultery, because Roman morality was very flexible until it suddenly wasn't. Augustus presented his rule as traditional, but it was something new. The empire had begun. When Augustus died in 14 CE, Rome held its breath. Transitions of power were still awkward. His stepson Tiberius succeeded him. Tiberius was not beloved. He was competent, capable, and deeply unpleasant. Tiberius ruled quietly at first, then withdrew from public life entirely, retiring to the island of Capri. There, according to ancient sources, he indulged in bizarre habits and cruelty. Some of these stories are probably exaggerated, some of them maybe not. Back in Rome, power fell to Sejanus, the head of the Praetorian Guard. Sejanus plotted, intrigued, removed rivals. Eventually, Tiberius noticed. Sejanus was arrested, executed, his body torn apart by a mob. Tiberius ruled on, paranoid and isolated, until his death. Next came Caligula. Caligula began well, young, popular, generous. Then he became Caligula. Ancient historians describe madness, cruelty, extravagance. He humiliated senators, declared himself divine, and reportedly planned to make his horse a consul, which may have been satire, or threat, or both. Caligula was executed by members of his own guard. Rome sighed again. The Praetorian Guard found his uncle hiding behind a curtain. They declared him emperor. Claudius was awkward, stammered, physically disabled. Everyone underestimated him, which turned out to be another mistake. Claudius was an effective administrator. He expanded the empire, conquered Britain. His personal life, however, was a disaster. His wife, Messalina, was infamous for her affairs. She was eventually executed. His next wife, Agrippina the Younger, was ambitious, very ambitious. She married Claudius, promoted her son Nero, and, according to many sources, poisoned Claudius. Nero became emperor at 16. At first, Nero was guided by advisors. Things were calm. Then he decided he wanted to be an artist. Nero loved performing, singing, acting, competing in games. Rome was less enthusiastic. He executed rivals, including his own mother. Then came the Great Fire of Rome. The city burned for days. Much was destroyed. Rumors spread that Nero had started it, or at least enjoyed it. To deflect blame, Nero persecuted Christians, public executions, spectacles. Eventually, the army turned against him. Nero fled, committed suicide. With his death, the Julio-Claudian dynasty ended. Rome entered the year of the 4 emperors: Galba, Otho, Vitellius, Vespasian. Each rose, each fell, some faster than others. Eventually, Vespasian won. He was practical, blunt, focused on stability. He began the Colosseum, funded by war spoils. He joked that money did not smell, which is memorable and accurate. Vespasian's sons followed him: Titus, who dealt with disasters like the eruption of Vesuvius, then Domitian, who ruled harshly and suspiciously. Domitian was executed, and Rome moved on. Because Rome always moved on. Let's float gently forward, past marble and blood and bureaucracy. In the next part, we'll drift into the so-called Golden Age, the emperors who tried to be good, the cracks forming anyway, and the slow realization that even an empire has limits. All right, settle back in again. Rome is entering what historians like to call its good phase, which is adorable because it's still Rome. We're now drifting into the era often labeled the Pax Romana, Roman peace, which mostly meant fewer civil wars at the center, not less violence overall, just outsourced violence. After the chaos of Domitian's assassination, the Senate did something unusual. They chose an emperor they actually liked. His name was Nerva. Nerva was old, gentle, short-lived. But he did one very important thing. He adopted a competent adult. This became a trend, and for once, Rome stumbled into a good idea. Nerva adopted Trajan. Trajan adopted Hadrian. Hadrian adopted Antoninus Pius. Antoninus Pius adopted Marcus Aurelius and Lucius Verus. These men are often called the 5 good emperors, which sounds like a boy band, a very stoic boy band. Trajan was first. Trajan was a soldier, a serious one. He expanded the empire to its greatest territorial extent. Under Trajan, Rome conquered Dacia, modern-day Romania. Lots of gold, lots of statues. Trajan built roads, harbors, markets. He funded massive public works. Rome loved him. He also spent an enormous amount of money, which is fun while it lasts. Trajan died while campaigning in the East because Rome never quite learned when to stop. His adopted son, Hadrian, took over. Hadrian was different. Hadrian did not want endless expansion. He wanted consolidation. He traveled constantly, visited provinces, inspected borders. He built Hadrian's Wall in Britain, a polite way of saying, please stop here. Hadrian was intellectual, architectural, emotionally complicated. He had a deep relationship with a young man named Antinous. When Antinous drowned in the Nile, Hadrian was devastated. He deified Antinous, built statues everywhere, which was Rome's version of grief processing. Hadrian ruled well, but became paranoid toward the end, executed rivals, chose his successor carefully. Antoninus Pius followed. Antoninus Pius was calm, boring, extremely effective. He ruled for over 2 decades without major wars, focused on law and administration. Rome prospered quietly, which, historically speaking, is dangerous because it creates expectations. Antoninus Pius adopted Marcus Aurelius. Marcus Aurelius is famous. You've seen his quotes: Stoic philosophy, meditations. He wanted to be a philosopher king. He got constant war. Plagues swept through the empire. The Antonine Plague killed millions. Germanic tribes pressed against the borders. Marcus spent much of his reign in military camps. He wrote philosophical notes reminding himself not to get angry, which suggests he was, in fact, very angry. Marcus Aurelius ruled with restraint, patience, self-control. And then he made one fatal mistake. He did not adopt a capable adult. He chose his biological son, Commodus. Commodus was not like his father. Commodus enjoyed luxury, gladiator games, attention. He fought in the arena, or at least pretended to, with blunted weapons against opponents who knew better than to win. He renamed Rome after himself because humility was not his thing. Eventually, Commodus was assassinated, strangled in his bath by a wrestler, which feels appropriate. With Commodus's death, the Golden Age ended. Rome slid into instability again. The year of the 5 emperors followed, short reigns, bribes to the Praetorian Guard. Eventually, Severus Septimius emerged victorious. Severus was a soldier emperor. He increased army pay, which made soldiers happy and the treasury nervous. He famously told his sons, "Be harmonious, enrich the soldiers, and scorn all others." Solid parenting advice, questionable governance. His sons were Caracalla and Geta. They did not get along at all. They attempted joint rule. Then Caracalla murdered Geta in front of their mother. Caracalla ruled alone. He extended Roman citizenship to all free men in the empire, which sounds generous, but also increased tax revenue. He was assassinated. Then came a blur. Short-lived emperors, military coups, economic strain. Rome entered the crisis of the 3rd century. This period was messy. Plagues, inflation, invasions. The empire briefly split into 3 parts: the Gallic Empire in the west, the Palmyrene Empire in the east, and a struggling central authority. Emperors rose and fell rapidly. Many died violently. Some ruled for months. Eventually, Diocletian took power. Diocletian was pragmatic and tired. He realized the empire was too big for one man, so he split it. 2 senior emperors, 2 junior emperors, the Tetrarchy. It worked, temporarily. Diocletian reformed taxes, stabilized the economy, persecuted Christians. Then, in a shocking move, he retired. Voluntarily. He went to grow cabbages. Rome stared in confusion. The system collapsed almost immediately after. Civil wars returned. Out of this chaos rose Constantine. Constantine won a decisive battle after seeing a vision, a Christian symbol, a promise of victory. He embraced Christianity. Eventually, gradually, politically. Constantine reunited the empire, founded a new capital, Constantinople. Rome was no longer the center of the world. Christianity spread. Pagan traditions faded. The empire transformed. After Constantine, stability remained elusive. The empire split permanently into eastern and western halves. The Western Empire struggled. Economic decline, fewer troops, more pressure from migrating tribes. Rome was sacked, again, and again. In 476 CE, a Germanic general deposed the last Western emperor, a boy named Romulus Augustulus, which is almost poetic. The Western Roman Empire was over. The Eastern Empire continued, for centuries, but that's another bedtime. For now, Rome has fallen. Not with a bang, but with paperwork, short reigns, long decline. A city built on ambition, held together by bureaucracy, undone by its own success. So let your thoughts drift. Marble crumbles, statues erode, roads remain. Rome fades into memory. And you, very gently, all right, ease back in. Nothing sudden is happening. Rome has technically fallen, but it's still hanging around like someone who stayed after the party to help clean up, and then never left. When we last drifted off, the Western Roman Empire had quietly ended in 476 CE. A boy emperor was removed, a crown was set aside, and most people living in the former empire barely noticed, which is one of history's great jokes. There was no dramatic final battle, no universal announcement, just administrative silence. The Western Empire didn't explode, it slowly forgot how to function. But Rome itself? Rome had already emotionally moved on, because the real power now lived in the East. The Eastern Roman Empire, what we usually call the Byzantine Empire, did not think of itself as Byzantine. That word comes later, much later. They called themselves Romans. They spoke Greek. They prayed differently, but they were absolutely convinced they were the continuation of Rome. And honestly, they had a point. Their capital, Constantinople, was wealthy, fortified, strategically placed. While the West dealt with crumbling roads and shrinking cities, the East collected taxes, paid armies, and kept records. Lots of records. So while Rome in the West faded into a memory, Rome in the East carried on, quietly, stubbornly. Let's float there for a moment. Constantinople was everything Rome had once been: grand, bustling, overconfident. It had massive walls, harbors, palaces, churches glittering with gold, and emperors who believed deeply in their own importance. Early Byzantine emperors spent much of their time dealing with threats: Persians to the east, various migrating groups to the north and west. But the system held. Then came Justinian. Justinian ruled in the 6th century. He had big dreams, very big. He wanted to restore Roman Empire to its former glory, all of it. Justinian reconquered large parts of the West, Italy, North Africa, southern Spain. For a moment, it looked like Rome was coming back. Justinian also reformed Roman law, codified it, organized it. The Justinian Code would influence legal systems for centuries, which is impressive and exhausting. But Justinian's reign came with problems. A massive plague swept through the empire, the plague of Justinian. Millions died. Cities emptied, economies stalled. Then there were riots. The Nika riots nearly overthrew Justinian. The city burned. Tens of thousands died in the Hippodrome. Justinian almost fled. His wife Theodora convinced him to stay. Theodora was formidable, former actress, sharp mind, no patience for weakness. Together, they survived. But the reconquered territories were expensive to hold, and after Justinian's death, much was lost again. The empire shrank, slowly. Over the centuries, the Byzantine Empire adapted. It became more Greek, more Christian, less Roman in style but not in identity. Emperors were crowned by church officials. The emperor was God's representative on earth. Politics and theology blended, frequently, violently. Religious disputes split communities, arguments over icons, over Christ's nature, over wording. Wars were fought over commas. Meanwhile, new powers rose. Islam emerged in the 7th century. Arab armies swept across former Roman territories: Syria, Egypt, North Africa. Gone. The Byzantine Empire survived, but diminished. Constantinople held on, protected by its walls and its location. For centuries, it endured sieges, attacks, blockades, and yet it remained. In the West, life went on differently. Former Roman lands became kingdoms: Visigoths, Franks, Lombards. Roman institutions faded, but Roman influence remained. Latin evolved into new languages. Roman roads were reused. Roman law echoed in custom. The idea of Rome was still powerful, so powerful that new rulers wanted to claim it. In 800 CE, Charlemagne was crowned Emperor of the Romans by the Pope. The Byzantines were not thrilled. Two empires, both claiming to be Rome. Very awkward. The medieval world continued this strange inheritance. Kings ruled over Roman ruins. Churches preserved Roman texts. Monks copied manuscripts by candlelight. Rome became a memory, an ideal, not a place, but a concept. Meanwhile, the Byzantine Empire kept going. Centuries passed. The empire shrank further, recovered slightly, shrank again. Civil wars weakened it. Crusaders, meant to help, sometimes didn't. In 1204, the Fourth Crusade sacked Constantinople, Christian soldiers looting a Christian city. Rome, once again, was betrayed from within. The Byzantine Empire survived that too, barely. By the 15th century, it was a shadow, a city, some land around it. In 1453, Constantinople fell to the Ottomans. The last Roman emperor died fighting on the walls. And this time, it really was the end. Or almost. Because Rome never quite stops echoing. Its legacy shaped Europe, law, architecture, language, governance. Even today, we talk about republics, senates, citizenship. We use Roman months, Roman roads, Roman ideas. Rome rose, Rome fell, Rome lingered, not as an empire, but as a habit. And that's the quiet ending. No fire, no final speech, just a long afterlife. So let your thoughts slow. Imagine marble dust settling, ink drying on decrees, footsteps fading down stone roads. Rome is gone, but it never really left. And with that gentle paradox, in the next part, we'll drift into the so-called Golden Age, the emperors who tried to be good, the cracks forming anyway, and the slow realization that even an empire has limits. All right, settle back in once more. We're well past the dramatic part now. Rome is no longer alive, but it's also not exactly dead. It's more influentially deceased. Think of this as the afterlife section. Very quiet, very lingering, like a civilization that keeps showing up in your dreams asking if you remembered to file the paperwork correctly. By the time Constantinople fell in 1453, Rome had technically ended several times already, and yet nobody seemed willing to let it go. Because Rome, as it turned out, was less of a place and more of an idea, a very heavy idea, the kind you build entire political systems on. Let's drift back to Western Europe for a moment. The former Roman provinces had become kingdoms, Frankish lands, Anglo-Saxon realms, Italian city-states. None of them were Rome, but all of them wanted to be Rome-adjacent. Latin remained the language of the church. Roman law influenced legal traditions. Roman ruins loomed over medieval towns like extremely judgmental ancestors. And then there was the title, Emperor. People really liked that title. In the year 800, Charlemagne was crowned emperor by the Pope in Rome. This was presented as the revival of the Roman Empire in the West. The Eastern Romans disagreed, strongly, quietly, for centuries. This new entity became known later as the Holy Roman Empire, which, famously, was not holy, not Roman, and not an empire. But it did try very hard. The Holy Roman Empire was a loose collection of territories in Central Europe. Its emperors claimed Roman legitimacy. They used Roman imagery, Roman titles, but their power was fragmented. Local rulers held real authority. Still, the idea mattered. Being Roman meant legitimacy, continuity, destiny. And so rulers borrowed it, over and over again. The Church, meanwhile, positioned itself as Rome's spiritual heir. The Bishop of Rome became the Pope. The Church inherited Roman administrative structures, dioceses, titles, hierarchy. Rome fell, but the Church remembered how to organize things, which is incredibly Roman of it. As centuries passed, Europe slowly rediscovered ancient Roman texts. During the Renaissance, scholars read Roman authors again: Cicero, Virgil, Tacitus. Artists studied Roman statues. Architects copied Roman buildings. Columns returned. Domes came back. Everyone suddenly wanted arches. Rome became fashionable. Not the messy, collapsing Rome of late antiquity, but an idealized version: marble white, balanced, rational. This imagined Rome inspired republics, especially one across the Atlantic. When the United States was founded, its leaders looked to Rome a lot. They named their legislature a Senate. They debated Republican virtue. They worried constantly about tyranny. They even dressed like Romans in paintings, which is a choice. Rome became a warning and a model at the same time: powerful, successful, fragile. Historians argued endlessly about why Rome fell. Was it moral decay, economic collapse, barbarian invasions, climate change, lead pipes? Probably all of it, slowly, together. Rome didn't fall because of one bad emperor or one invasion. It fell because systems aged, because complexity became unmanageable, because success created problems it couldn't solve fast enough, which is not exciting, but it is relatable. Rome also left behind something else: stories. Romanticized emperors, villainized emperors, heroes, tyrants. Nero fiddling, Caesar crossing rivers, Augustus bringing peace. Some true, some exaggerated, some invented. Roman historians had agendas. They liked drama. They hated certain people. So our picture of Rome is filtered through opinions, grudges, political bitterness. And yet the outlines remain. A small city grew too powerful, conquered too much, held on for centuries longer than anyone expected. It adapted, reformed, split. It survived in the East long after the West collapsed. And even when it finally ended, it shaped everything that came after: languages, borders, ideas. Even now, when people talk about empires rising and falling, Rome is the reference point. Always Rome. It's the default comparison, the standard example, which is impressive considering how much of it was chaos: corrupt officials, nepotism, military coups. Rome was not orderly. It was persistent. That might be its real legacy: not perfection, but endurance. So as we come to the very end of this long, quiet journey, there's no final lesson, no moral wrapped neatly in a toga. Just a civilization that lasted far longer than it should have, and then lingered even longer in memory. Rome ended, and ended again, and again, and every time someone rebuilt it in their mind. So let your thoughts slow now. Imagine stone columns half buried in grass, roads fading into fields, Latin words becoming something new. Rome rests, and you can too. All right, let's ease back in one last time. Nothing new is happening, just echoes. Soft, historical echoes that refuse to stop bouncing around the modern world. By now, Rome is no longer an empire, a city, or even a political system. Rome is a metaphor, and historians love metaphors. They can talk about them forever, very quietly, very confidently. After the fall, whichever fall you prefer, because Rome fell in stages like a badly organized retirement, people began arguing about what it all meant, and they never really stopped. Medieval thinkers looked at Rome and saw divine punishment. Dad had rewarded Rome when it was virtuous, then punished it when it became sinful. This explanation was very popular. It required no spreadsheets, just moral judgment. Augustine wrote The City of God, partly to explain why Rome's collapse did not mean Christianity had failed. Rome, he argued, was never eternal. Only the heavenly city was. which was comforting and also very convenient. Later thinkers preferred more practical explanations. They blamed corruption, luxury, decadence, too much silk, too many banquets, not enough discipline. Rome became a story about excess, a warning whispered to anyone who felt too comfortable. Then came the Enlightenment. Now Rome was analyzed, dissected, measured. Edward Gibbon famously argued that Rome fell because of moral decay and Christianity weakening civic duty. This caused arguments, very long arguments, still ongoing arguments. Rome became a case study. Empires rose, empires fell. Rome was the template. The British Empire compared itself to Rome constantly, sometimes proudly, sometimes nervously. British politicians talked about roads, law, order. They liked the Roman parts that sounded respectable. They ignored the civil wars, the assassinations, the occasional total collapse of authority. Other empires did the same. Napoleon styled himself as a new Caesar, borrowed Roman imagery, Roman titles. He crowned himself emperor, because that always ends well. He built monuments, reformed laws, and eventually lost everything, which was again very Roman. Even in modern times, Rome is never far away. We still say all roads lead to Rome. We still call government buildings capitals. We still name months after Roman gods and emperors. We still debate republics versus empires. Rome left vocabulary behind, concepts, frameworks, and it left behind a sense of inevitability, that no system lasts forever, that complexity breeds fragility, that success carries seeds of decline. But Rome also complicates that lesson, because it didn't collapse overnight. It adapted, rebranded, moved capitals, changed religions. It survived invasions, plagues, bad leadership. Rome was stubborn. Even when it stopped expanding, it didn't disappear. It thinned out, faded unevenly. Some areas declined quickly, others thrived for centuries, which makes it hard to point to a single ending. Was Rome gone in 476, in 1453, or when Latin stopped being spoken? Or is it still here, in laws, in borders, in assumptions about power? That ambiguity is why Rome is comforting to historians. You can always keep talking about it. Rome also gives us permission to think slowly. Its story stretches over 1,000 years, more depending on how you count. It reminds us that change is gradual, that collapse can feel like normal life to those living through it. Most Romans didn't wake up one day thinking, "Ah yes, the empire is ending." They worried about taxes, food, local disputes. Life continued, and that might be the most Roman thing of all. No dramatic ending, just adjustment. So when people today worry about decline, Rome appears again, in headlines, in commentary, in anxious comparisons, sometimes accurately, sometimes lazily. Rome becomes shorthand for everything we fear losing: stability, order, identity. But Rome itself was never stable, never truly unified. It was layered, contradictory, a republic that hated kings, an empire ruled by emperors pretending not to be kings, a Christian state built on pagan foundations. Rome worked because it changed, and it failed because it could not change fast enough in some places. That tension between adaptation and rigidity is what keeps Rome relevant and quietly fascinating. So here we are, at the very end of a very long story. A city founded on a murder, built by conquest, held together by law, force, and habit. An empire that ruled millions, then fragmented, then lived on in memory. Rome doesn't give us a neat moral, it gives us a mirror. Sometimes flattering, sometimes uncomfortable, and always persistent. So let the thoughts drift now. Imagine a road stretching out, stone worn smooth by centuries of feet.
No banners, no legions, just the quiet sense that someone passed this way before. Rome has gone to sleep, and you can too.
All right, settle in. This is the soft ending, the long fade out, the part where nothing new happens, and that's exactly the point. By now, Rome has said everything it's going to say. It's been conquered, reimagined, recycled, footnoted, and argued over for centuries. If empires had a retirement phase, this would be it. Historians, however, are not good at letting things rest. So Rome keeps getting invited back into conversations it didn't ask to be part of. Whenever a modern state feels powerful, Rome gets praised. Whenever it feels unstable, Rome gets blamed. Whenever someone needs an analogy, Rome is right there, waiting, patient, very dead. What's strange is how familiar Rome still feels. The complaints sound modern. High taxes, corrupt officials, political gridlock, generals with opinions. Roman writers complained endlessly about youth being lazy, about morals declining, about the past being better. They were doing this while Rome was still strong, which should tell us something. Every generation thought it was living through decline, and yet the empire continued for centuries. Rome teaches us that feeling like things are falling apart does not always mean they are. Sometimes it just means you're paying attention. Of course, sometimes things really are falling apart. Rome also teaches that. Slow decline feels boring while it's happening. Infrastructure erodes, administration weakens, resources stretch thinner. Nothing explodes. Things just stop working as well. Late Roman roads weren't abandoned overnight. They were repaired less often, maintained unevenly. Cities didn't vanish, they shrank, lost services, lost people. Rome faded in layers, which is why it's so hard to say when it ended. And maybe that's the final Roman trick. It refuses to give us a clean ending. No final emperor speech, no last Senate vote, no official announcement, just a gradual quiet. Rome passed into history the same way people fall asleep, slowly, without noticing the exact moment. And here we are now, at the end of this very long, very calm story. We started with a wolf, a murder, a city built on ambition. We drifted through kings, republics, emperors, through marble and blood and bureaucracy. We watched Rome rise, expand, crack, reform, split. We followed it east, then into memory, and finally into metaphor. Rome is no longer something you can visit in real time. It's ruins, texts, concepts. It's a warning people argue about, a model people misuse, a past people romanticize. But Rome itself is done. No more emperors, no more legions, no more decrees stamped with authority. Just echoes. And echoes are quiet things. They don't demand attention. They linger. Which makes Rome perfect for nights like this. A story long enough to stretch out, complex enough to distract the mind, familiar enough to feel safe. Nothing jumps out, nothing needs reacting to, just centuries passing. So if your thoughts are slowing now, that's fine. If details are blurring together, that's very Roman. Empires blur when you look at them too long. Let the names fade. Let the dates soften. All that's left is the shape of the story. A rise, a long middle, a gentle ending that never quite ends. Rome goes quiet. And with that, you can rest. All right. If you're still here, that's impressive. And if you're half asleep, that's even better. This is the final stretch, where Rome is no longer doing anything at all. It's just being remembered, softly, in the background. At this point, Rome has fully crossed over into something passive. It no longer acts. It no longer reacts. It only exists when someone thinks about it, and most of the time, nobody does. Modern cities sit on Roman foundations without noticing. Roads follow Roman paths because they're convenient, not symbolic. People use Roman law concepts without wondering where they came from. Rome has become invisible, which is the most complete form of influence. The ruins themselves are quiet. Columns stand without context. Forums become tourist routes. Amphitheaters host concerts. The Colosseum, once filled with noise and expectation, now just absorbs footsteps. Cameras click. People move on. No one is afraid of it anymore. And that's important. Rome once ruled through fear, authority, and habit. Now it survives through familiarity. You don't need to understand Rome to live inside its legacy. You just do. This is how history finishes most of the time. Not with lessons, not with clarity, just absorption. Rome dissolves into everything that came after it, so completely that it's hard to separate cause from inheritance. And eventually, even historians stop talking. They run out of new angles, new metaphors, new arguments. Rome becomes settled. Not exciting, not urgent, just there. Which is why it works so well as a sleep story. There's no twist coming, no revelation waiting, nothing unresolved. Every question Rome raises has already been asked, answered poorly, re-answered differently. The empire is done contributing. All that remains is the space it once occupied. And maybe that's the most peaceful ending Rome could have. A civilization that began with violence, ends with silence. No legions marching, no banners, no speeches. Just time moving forward without it. So if your mind is drifting now, that's perfect. You don't need to remember names. You don't need to follow timelines. Rome doesn't need attention anymore. It's finished being important. And you're finished listening. So let the last echo fade. Stone cools. Ink dries. History closes its book. Rome rests. And now, so can you. All right. This is the part where even history has stopped pretending something might occur. No new emperors, no reforms, no invasions waiting around the corner. Just quiet. At this stage, Rome exists in the same way a distant memory does. You know it was important, you know it mattered, but you no longer feel the weight of it pressing on you. And that's a relief. Because Rome, for most of its existence, was very demanding. Taxes, service, loyalty, attention. It asked a lot from the people who lived inside it. Now it asks nothing. The empire that once needed constant administration, endless paperwork, and a small army of scribes has finally stopped filing reports. No census, no edicts, no grain shipments to track. Just stillness. This is the version of Rome that never makes it into textbooks, the post-significance Rome. Not fallen, not glorious, just finished. The ruins don't care who built them, they don't care who ruled, they don't care who won which civil war. Stone doesn't remember ambition, and neither do most people. That's another quiet truth Rome leaves behind. Memory fades faster than power ever did. For centuries, Rome obsessed over its legacy. Statues, inscriptions, triumphs. Every emperor wanted to be remembered. Most weren't. Some names survive, many don't. And even the famous ones blur together when you stop paying attention. Which feels fair. Rome demanded remembrance, but time was never obligated to comply. And eventually, it didn't. What remains is atmosphere, a sense of scale, a vague impression of something vast and complicated. You don't need details anymore. Details are awake things. This is the part where you let them go. Think of Rome now as a background hum, So distant you're not sure if it's real or imagined, like hearing traffic far away, like wind through trees you can't see. It's there, but it doesn't require a response. That's the final transformation, from empire to example to echo to nothing in particular. Rome becomes part of the quiet. So if your thoughts are drifting sideways now, that's perfect. History doesn't mind. It's finished telling its story, and you don't need to stay awake for the ending. There isn't one. Just a long, calm continuation without Rome in it, and that's okay. Let the silence do what it does best. Stay still.
All right. If this is still playing, that means one of two things. You're either incredibly dedicated or very comfortably unconscious. Either way, we're exactly where we should be. By now, Rome isn't even a thought anymore. It's more like the feeling you get when you realize you've forgotten what you were just thinking about. That vague, gentle blankness. That's Rome now. Once it needed armies, then it needed laws, then it needed historians to explain what went wrong. Now it doesn't need anything. It has reached the most peaceful state a civilization can achieve, complete irrelevance. And that's not an insult, it's rest. Every empire dreams of being eternal. Rome came closer than most. But eternity, it turns out, is exhausting. So Rome stopped trying. The arguments ended first, then the comparisons, then even the metaphors started wearing thin. Eventually, Rome became something you encountered accidentally, a word, a shape, a ruin half covered in ivy. No urgency, no meaning attached unless you decided to attach one. This is where history always wants to end, but rarely gets to, a place where nothing is demanded of the present. Rome no longer warns us, no longer inspires us, no longer judges us. It simply exists in the background of human memory, like an old photograph you don't recognize anyone in anymore. You can look at it or not. Either way, it doesn't mind. The people who lived in Rome worried endlessly about the future, about decline, about chaos, about being forgotten. And here we are, centuries later, not worrying about them at all. Which is strangely comforting. It means the present always wins eventually, no matter how powerful the past once was. So if you're still awake enough to hear this, there's nothing left to process. No takeaway, no lesson to remember tomorrow. Rome doesn't need to be understood anymore. It's done explaining itself. Let the words thin out now. Let the gaps between thoughts stretch longer. History has stopped talking, and you don't have to listen. Just rest here, in the quiet that comes after everything important has already happened. All right. This is the part where even the idea of an ending feels like too much effort. The story finished a while ago. We're just letting the silence settle properly. By now, Rome is no longer a subject. It's background texture, like the low hum you only notice when it stops. Nothing new has happened for a very long time, and nothing is about to. The last people who truly felt Roman are gone. The last officials who signed documents in Latin thinking it mattered are dust. The last soldiers who believed the empire would continue forever never got to find out otherwise. Time handled that quietly. History books make Rome feel loud, busy, crowded with names and dates, but lived history is mostly quiet. People waking up, doing ordinary things, not realizing they're in the middle of something future generations will overthink. Most Romans did not feel like they were in the Roman Empire. They were just at work, or tired, or annoyed about taxes. And then one day, the systems they relied on worked a little less well, and then a little less, and then not at all. No moment, no announcement, just absence.
That's what we're sitting with now. Absence doesn't rush. It doesn't need emphasis. It just stays. This is where history becomes indistinguishable from sleep. Thoughts lose edges. Connections loosen. Rome becomes a shape without detail, a long shadow with no source. If your mind wanders now, that's fine. It's doing exactly what time did to Rome, letting go. There's nothing left to hold on to, no final insight hiding somewhere, just a very old story that no longer needs retelling. The tape keeps running because it always does, but no one's recording anything important anymore, and that's okay. So stay still, or don't, it doesn't matter. Rome isn't watching. All right, this is the part where even the silence has settled in. Not dramatic silence, not meaningful silence, just the kind that exists when there's nothing left to react to. Rome has been gone for a long time now, not fallen, not remembered, just gone in the way old noise disappears when you turn something off and forget about it. The story finished pages ago. We're well past the footnotes. This is the empty space at the end of the book where your eyes linger without reading anything, and that's fine. If history had a natural resting state, this would be it. No analysis, no parallels, no one asking what it means, because meaning takes effort, and Rome has done enough. Once, it needed constant motion to exist, armies marching, laws being written, coins being minted. Then, it needed people to argue about it, scholars, politicians, students half listening in classrooms. Now, it doesn't even need that. Rome has become neutral, emotionless, unbothered. The past doesn't demand relevance forever. Eventually, it just becomes distance, and distance is calm. You don't need to picture anything anymore. No marble, no roads, no ruins. Even those fade when you stop holding them in your mind. This is history at rest, not teaching, not warning, not inspiring, just existing somewhere far behind you. If your thoughts are drifting in and out now, that's perfect. That's what happens when a story no longer requires attention. Rome doesn't need an ending. It already had too many. So we let it sit here, unfinished, unimportant, at peace. The recording keeps going, the words keep slowing, and eventually, there's nothing left to say. All right. We're very far past the point where stories usually stop. That's intentional. This is the stretched out quiet that comes after the ending, when nothing is required of you anymore. Rome is no longer even a subject. It's more like a temperature, a background condition, something that exists without asking to be noticed. At this stage, even historians have gone home. The debates are finished, the books are closed, the arguments have worn themselves smooth. What's left is time. Wide, slow, unbothered time. If you were to walk through the ruins of Rome right now, real Rome, modern Rome, you wouldn't feel the empire pressing down on you. You'd feel traffic, footsteps, tourists standing in the wrong place. Life doesn't pause for legacy. The Colosseum doesn't remember gladiators. The Forum doesn't remember speeches. Stone doesn't hold grudges. That's something Rome never quite understood while it was alive. It thought permanence came from monuments, from laws carved into bronze, from names repeated loudly enough. But permanence, it turns out, is quieter than that. Rome lasted not because it was loud, but because it was adaptable. And when adaptation stopped working, it didn't vanish, it dissolved. That's a softer ending than most empires get. Think about the people at the very end of Roman rule in the West. Not emperors, not generals, ordinary people. A shopkeeper opening late because supplies didn't arrive. A farmer repairing the same tool again instead of replacing it. A city official quietly ignoring an order that no longer makes sense. No one announces decline. They adjust around it. Rome ended through adjustments, and that's why it's so easy to miss. History likes clean lines, dates, moments. Life prefers blur. So when we talk about Rome falling, what we really mean is that it slowly stopped being useful in the way it once was. Its systems grew heavy, its responses slowed, its answers arrived too late. But people kept living. Children were born who never knew a functioning empire. They didn't feel loss, they felt normal. That's another quiet truth Rome leaves behind. The end of something's huge often feels like the beginning of something small. Villages replaced cities. Local customs replaced universal law. Fewer taxes, fewer protections, fewer expectations. Life shrank, and for many, that was easier. Rome's scale had been impressive, but it was also exhausting. The empire demanded coordination across continents, communication over weeks, trust in systems you would never see. When those systems thinned out, life became simpler. Harder in some ways, but smaller. Smaller lives sleep better. And that's where Rome finally lands. Not in glory, not in ruin, but in sleep. The same sleep we're drifting toward now. No more timelines, no more causes, no more consequences. Just the slow understanding that everything complicated eventually becomes simple again. Rome didn't need to be remembered forever. It just needed to exist long enough to shape what came next. And it did that, more than enough. So now, there's no reason to hold on to it. No reason to replay battles or recite emperors. Those were awake things, sharp things. This is the dull, comfortable end. Imagine the city at night. Not ancient Rome, not modern Rome. Just a city. Lights dimmed, streets mostly empty, stone cooling after a long day. No banners, no announcements, just buildings standing because they always have. That's Rome now. Not a lesson, not a warning, just a shape the world once took, and slowly, very slowly, forgot. If your thoughts are wandering, let them. If words are blending together, that's perfect. This part isn't meant to be remembered. It's meant to fade. The empire is gone. The story is done. The echo has settled. Nothing more is expected. Stay here as long as you like, or don't. Rome won't notice, and neither will history.
All right, let's gently loop back. Not forward, not toward an ending. Back to the beginning feeling. The part where stories still think they're going somewhere. Because Rome, for most of its life, was trying very hard to become something permanent. And effort, quiet effort, is strangely soothing to listen to. So imagine we're standing again in very early Rome. Not the marble Rome, not the empire. Just a small settlement near a river that floods when it feels like it. The Tiber was unreliable, which made it perfect. Floods deposited fertile soil. Trade passed through. Rome didn't choose greatness. It tripped into it. Early Romans were practical, suspicious of luxury, deeply impressed by discipline. They admired farmers more than poets, soldiers more than artists. Virtue mattered, at least publicly. Roman virtue meant self-control, duty, endurance. Suffering quietly was considered admirable, which explains a lot later. Early Rome was surrounded by rivals, Etruscans, Latins, Sabines. Small conflicts were constant. Borders were flexible, alliances temporary. Rome survived because it absorbed enemies instead of erasing them. Conquered peoples were offered citizenship over time, not immediately, not generously, but eventually. This was unusual and very effective. Rome didn't just win wars, it collected people,
Every conquest added manpower, soldiers, laborers, taxpayers. Rome grew outward, then inward. By the time it became powerful, it was already used to managing difference. Languages, customs, gods. Rome didn't care what you worshipped, as long as you participated. Religion was transactional. Sacrifice in, protection out, as long as order remained. This tolerance wasn't kindness, it was efficiency, and efficiency was Rome's true religion. The Republic formalized this mindset. Laws mattered, precedent mattered, process mattered. Even when politics became vicious, Romans insisted they were following tradition. They loved tradition, even when inventing it. The Senate was meant to represent wisdom, age, experience. In practice, it represented wealth. Old families competed quietly, then loudly. Political careers followed a path. Offices climbed like steps. Mess something up, and your family paid for it for generations. Rome remembered grudges. Military service was expected. Citizenship came with obligation. And the army shaped everything. Roman legions weren't just fighters, they were builders. They built roads as they marched, forts as they camped. Where the army went, Rome followed. Roads connected everything, not for convenience, for control. Messages moved faster, troops moved faster. The empire was stitched together with stone. As Rome expanded, wealth poured in, too much wealth. Victory brought slaves, land, money. Small farmers couldn't compete. They sold land, moved to cities. Urban Rome swelled. The Republic strained. Politicians promised reform, then blocked it. Violence crept in, not suddenly, gradually. First insults, then fists, then clubs, eventually swords. Rome crossed lines without noticing. Generals gained loyalty from soldiers who depended on them for pay and land. This shifted power. The Republic was designed for a city-state. It was now running an empire. The systems didn't scale. And Rome did what it always did when systems failed. It improvised. Badly. Strong men rose because the state couldn't act quickly enough. Each promised stability, each left things worse. By the time Caesar crossed the Rubicon, Rome had already normalized civil war. Caesar just admitted it. And when the Republic died, it didn't scream. It sighed. The empire that followed kept Republican language alive because Romans liked pretending continuity existed. Titles mattered. Appearances mattered. Emperors called themselves first citizens, servants of the state, while holding absolute power. This fiction comforted everyone. As long as rituals continued, Rome believed itself unchanged, and that belief carried it forward for centuries. Even bad emperors ruled inside Roman expectations. They issued laws, held games, maintained grain supplies. When they failed, they were removed, violently. But the system endured. Rome tolerated incompetence surprisingly well, but it hated unpredictability. That's why it lasted, not because leaders were great, but because institutions were stubborn. Over time, those institutions hardened, adaptations slowed, responses lagged. Rome became heavy, too large to move quickly, too interconnected to fail cleanly. So it frayed. Edges weakened first, borders leaked, authority localized, but the center stayed busy pretending control existed. Paperwork continued, orders issued, ignored. And gradually, the idea of Rome mattered more than its reality, which is where we quietly leave it. Not at the end, not at the fall, but in motion, trying, adjusting. Because Rome was never a single moment, it was effort stretched across centuries. And effort, when described slowly enough, is calming. So let that effort fade now. The river keeps flowing, roads keep leading somewhere, People keep living ordinary lives. Rome does not demand attention here. It's just happening. And that's enough.
All right. We're drifting into the part of the story that never feels important while it's happening, the middle. The long, beige middle, where nothing collapses and nothing triumphs, and Rome simply continues being Rome. This is where empires actually spend most of their time, not rising, not falling, just maintaining. Which sounds boring and is exactly why it works so well for sleep. After the empire settled into its routine, life became predictable in a very Roman way. Taxes were collected, grain was shipped, edicts were issued, complaints were filed. Most emperors did not try to change the world, they tried to keep it from wobbling, and wobbling was constant. Frontiers needed watching. Barbarians, an extremely Roman word for people who are not us, pressed at the edges, not always violently, often just persistently. Rome responded with forts, treaties, payments, sometimes invasion, sometimes bribes, usually a mix. The army remained everywhere, not marching dramatically, just stationed. Soldiers guarded borders, built infrastructure, married locals, retired nearby. This is how Roman culture spread, not through speeches, through proximity. Bathhouses appeared, Latin words slipped into daily speech, local gods were quietly merged with Roman ones. Rome didn't erase identities, it layered over them. And layers take time. Cities across the empire looked increasingly similar: forums, temples, amphitheaters. You could travel from Spain to Syria and still recognize the layout. That familiarity was comforting and controlling. Rome liked familiarity. It made governance easier. Citizenship expanded slowly. Privileges widened. By Caracalla's time, nearly all free men were Roman citizens, which sounds inclusive, but also meant everyone paid taxes. Rome was generous with identity, less so with exemptions. Daily life in the empire was structured, predictable. Markets opened, courts met, festivals occurred on schedule. Most people never saw an emperor. They saw officials, local elites, tax collectors. Rome was experienced through paperwork, and that distance mattered. Because when things began to strain, people didn't blame Rome, they blamed the man in front of them, the local governor, the magistrate, the soldier asking questions. Rome itself stayed abstract. That abstraction helped it survive, but it also hid problems. As costs rose, taxes increased. As borders stretched, defense weakened. Coinage was debased, silver content dropped, prices rose, confidence slipped. Rome adjusted, again and again. Each adjustment solved one problem and created another. This is the rhythm of long-lived systems. Fix, compensate, patch. Never pause. By the 3rd century, the patchwork was showing. Emperors came from the army more often, legitimacy came from soldiers, not tradition. Reigns shortened, violence normalized. But even then, Rome didn't feel like it was ending. It felt like it was busy. Busy is dangerous, because busy systems don't reflect, they respond. Diocletian responded by reorganizing everything, splitting power, formalizing hierarchy. For a while, it worked. Constantine responded by changing ideology, unifying faith, centralizing authority. For a while, it worked. Each reform bought time, and Rome was very good at buying time. The West simply ran out first.
Fewer resources, less population, more pressure. The East had cities, trade, money, so the East endured. This unevenness is important. Rome didn't fall everywhere. It thinned unevenly, which made it confusing. People argued over whether it was still Rome at all. Identity became flexible. Was Rome a place, a government, a faith? Different people answered differently, and Rome, being Rome, tried to be all of them. Too many roles, too many expectations. Eventually, the West let go. Not dramatically, administratively. Titles stopped mattering, orders stopped arriving. Local rulers filled gaps. Life went on. That's the quiet part historians sometimes rush past. Rome ended not when people stopped living Roman lives, but when those lives no longer required Rome. That's a subtle difference, and subtle endings don't announce themselves. So here, in this long middle, Rome exists as habit, not ambition, not destiny, just habit. People do things because they always have. They repair roads because roads exist. They follow laws because laws are written. They pay taxes because someone asks. Until, slowly, fewer people ask. This is not collapse, it's drift. And drift is slow, gentle, almost comforting, which is why it's easy to rest here. No climaxes, no crises, just continuity wearing thin. So let the rhythm slow. Grain ships arrive, then arrive less often, then not at all. The calendar still marks Roman holidays, even when no one remembers why. Rome continues not because it's strong, but because stopping would require effort, and effort eventually runs out. For now, though, we stay here, in the middle, where nothing urgent is happening, and that's exactly how Rome liked it. All right, we're easing into the part of the story where Rome stops trying to impress anyone. No grand gestures, no desperate reforms. Just a slow adjustment to being normal, which is something Rome was never particularly trained for. For centuries, Rome existed in a state of exception. It was always expanding, reforming, conquering, or recovering. There was always a crisis somewhere that justified urgency. But now, urgency is fading. Not because things are perfect, they aren't, but because people are tired. And tired systems behave differently. Late Roman life becomes quieter, less monumental, more local. Big decisions matter less than small ones. Who controls the town? Who repairs the bridge? Who settles disputes? The empire still exists on paper, still issues laws, still collects taxes sometimes. But paper authority only works if people believe in it. And belief is slipping. In many places, Roman officials remain in place simply because no one has replaced them yet. Governors become local strongmen. Military commanders become regional rulers. Not through rebellion, through convenience. Rome didn't lose control everywhere at once. It delegated without meaning to. This is how empires end when no one is paying attention. People stop looking to the center. Not angrily, not dramatically. They just stop expecting answers. And Rome, famously, was slow to answer. In the countryside, life simplifies. Large estates break into smaller holdings. Trade networks shrink. Luxury goods disappear first. You stop seeing spices from far away. You stop seeing fine ceramics. Local production replaces global trade. Not worse, just closer. Cities shrink. Public buildings fall into disuse. Bathhouses close because heating them is expensive. Amphitheaters stop hosting games, not because anyone bans them, because organizing them is too much work. Entertainment scales down. So does ambition. In many former Roman cities, people live among ruins without caring much about them. Columns become building material. Statues become stone sources. Rome becomes a quarry, which is strangely fitting. The empire that once took from everyone now provides raw material. Meanwhile, identity shifts. People still call themselves Roman, but it means something different. It means not barbarian. It means from here. It means we follow certain rules. Roman becomes cultural, not political. This transition is slow and mostly unconscious. No one fills out a form renouncing Rome. They just live differently. Christianity plays a role here. The church becomes a stable structure when the state weakens. Bishops organize communities, provide aid, settle disputes. They are present. Rome is distant, so loyalty shifts. Not by decree, by habit. This is not a dramatic takeover. It's substitution, one system quietly replacing another. In many places, the church preserves Roman ideas, law, administration, literacy, but it also reshapes them. The focus turns inward, toward morality, salvation, community. The empire once promised order. Now the church promises meaning. People accept the trade. In the East, things are different. Constantinople remains busy, wealthy, organized. The Eastern Empire still feels Roman because it still functions. Taxes flow, armies march, officials argue. But even there, Rome is changing. Greek replaces Latin. Christian ritual replaces old civic tradition. The empire becomes more ceremonial, more formal, less flexible. And that stiffness matters later. But for now, it works. Which brings us back to the West. The Western Roman Empire didn't vanish into chaos everywhere. In some regions, life stabilized quickly. New kingdoms formed: Visigoths, Ostrogoths, Franks. Their rulers adopted Roman titles, Roman law, Roman customs, because Rome still meant legitimacy. Even when the empire was gone, the idea remained useful. This is the quiet irony of Rome's end. It lost power, but kept authority. People stopped obeying emperors, but kept obeying Roman ways. Roads stayed roads. Laws stayed laws. Language evolved, but didn't disappear. Rome became ordinary. And ordinary things last longer than grand ones. That's the part Rome never planned for. It wanted to be eternal through greatness. It became eternal through mundanity. So here we sit, in a world where Rome no longer commands, but quietly underwrites everything. Not loudly, not proudly, just there, like a foundation you don't think about until something cracks. And nothing is cracking right now, which makes this a good place to rest. No battles, no speeches, just people living among leftovers. Rome has stopped trying to be special, and that, oddly enough, is how it survives the longest.
All right, let's ease back in. No sharp turns, no new eras beginning, just a continuation of the slow settling. By now, Rome is no longer collapsing, transforming, or redefining itself. It has already done all of that. Now it's in the phase where even remembering takes effort, and effort is quietly being withdrawn. Generations have passed since anyone lived under a functioning Western Roman emperor. Children grow up hearing the word Rome without attaching much weight to it. It's a story adults tell, a word in prayers, a shape in old stone, not a system they rely on. This is how empires truly end, not when power is lost, but when relevance fades. People stop asking what Rome would do. They stop measuring themselves against it. They stop caring if something is Roman at all. Life has other priorities: harvests, local disputes, weather. The world shrinks again.
In former Roman lands, identity becomes layered. You are from a village, then a region, then maybe a kingdom. Rome, if it appears at all, is somewhere in the background, a distant ancestor nobody ever met. Latin continues, but it changes. It softens. It bends. Words drift. Grammar loosens. Eventually, no one speaks Latin anymore, not as Rome knew it. Instead, there are new languages: French, Spanish, Italian, Portuguese. They carry Rome inside them, but they don't feel Roman. That transition happens quietly. No one announces, "This is no longer Latin." They just speak. This is another Roman ending that doesn't look like an ending. The same happens with law. Roman legal ideas survive because they're practical: contracts, property, obligations. Kings and judges use them without thinking about where they came from. Rome becomes anonymous, and anonymity is peaceful. In monasteries, monks copy old Roman texts not because they feel loyalty to Rome, but because the books are there. They preserve Cicero without knowing much about the Republic. They preserve Virgil without caring about Augustus. Rome survives because someone needed parchment practice. That's not heroic, it's accidental, which makes it very durable. Meanwhile, in the East, the Roman identity still matters. The Byzantine emperors insist they are Roman. Their laws say so. Their ceremonies say so. But even there, the word Roman is stretching. It means Christian. It means Greek-speaking. It means imperial. Not quite what it used to mean. And that's fine. Identities change the same way stones erode, gradually, without drama. No one wakes up and feels different. They just notice one day that the old definitions don't fit anymore. Rome becomes ceremonial, a title, a tradition, less lived, more performed, and performance takes energy. Eventually, even that fades. What replaces it isn't chaos, it's routine. Kings rule, bishops mediate, communities organize themselves. Rome's absence becomes normal. That's the hardest part for historians to accept. We like collapse stories, sharp endings, clear villains. But Rome's final act is not exciting enough for that. It just stops being needed. People don't miss it because they've already adapted. Which brings us here, to a moment where Rome is no longer present, but not actively gone either. It's like a sound you don't hear anymore until someone mentions it. Oh, that was there once, and then you forget again. This is where Rome finally rests, not in glory, not in ruin, in irrelevance, which is not an insult, it's relief. Nothing demands explanation, nothing needs defending. Rome no longer has to justify itself, and neither do you. So if your thoughts are thinning now, if the words feel softer, less defined, that's exactly right. This part of the story isn't meant to be held, it's meant to pass through. Rome has passed through history, and history has passed through you. There's nothing left to carry forward, just quiet continuation. And that's enough.
All right. We're easing into the stretch where time itself has stopped checking in. No updates, no revisions, no concern for whether Rome approves of any of it. Because by now, time has moved on completely. Rome no longer sits at the center of anyone's mental map, not politically, not culturally, not emotionally. It's not being argued over. It's not being blamed. It's not being used as an example in everyday conversation. It's just behind everything. And that's a different kind of ending. Think about how landscapes change. A river shifts its course a little each year.
No single day feels dramatic, but eventually the old path is dry. Rome is the old riverbed. You can still see where it once flowed, the shape remains, but the water has moved elsewhere, and no one sends a notice. In former Roman lands, people wake up, work, eat, sleep. Their lives no longer require imperial coordination. They require local solutions. Someone fixes the roof, someone settles a dispute, someone decides when the market opens. Authority becomes immediate again, nearby, understandable. Rome's great achievement had been scale. Its great weakness, too. Once scale stopped helping, it quietly became unnecessary. This is when history becomes comfortable. Not triumphant, not tragic. Comfortable. People adjust expectations downward, not consciously, just gradually. No more expecting roads to be repaired instantly, no more expecting distant officials to care. Lower expectations are surprisingly calming, and calm is where Rome finally lands. For centuries, Rome demanded vigilance. Borders watched, enemies anticipated, rebellions prevented. That vigilance ends, not because threats vanish, but because the idea of a single response vanishes. Problems become local again, smaller, slower, and oddly easier to live with. Rome had promised order everywhere. When it couldn't deliver, people stopped asking. That's the moment of release. In the East, where Rome survived longer, this release came later, but it came there too. Even Constantinople eventually stopped thinking of itself as the center of the world. It became one power among many, important, but not inevitable. And inevitability is exhausting. Rome had lived too long believing it was inevitable. When that belief fades, something relaxes. History loses its urgency. The future opens up again. This is where new identities grow, not in opposition to Rome, but without reference to it. People stop defining themselves by what they inherited. They start defining themselves by what's nearby. This is quieter than revolution, but more permanent. Rome doesn't get overthrown here, it gets bypassed, and bypassed systems rarely notice. They just sit there, waiting for instructions that never come. Eventually, the waiting ends too. The past settles into the ground. This is why Rome feels everywhere and nowhere at once. Its ideas are embedded so deeply that they don't feel like ideas anymore. They feel natural. Law, citizenship, infrastructure, all inherited, all unremarkable. Rome succeeded so completely that it became invisible, and invisibility is the final stage of influence. By now, there's nothing left to resolve, no loose threads. The empire's work is done. So if your mind feels light right now, if you're not tracking sentences the way you used to, that's good. That's where this story wanted to go. Not toward meaning, not toward closure, toward ease. Rome no longer asks for attention. Time no longer pauses for it. Everything continues without checking back. And you don't need to either. Just let the thoughts thin out. The road keeps going, but you don't have to follow it anymore. Rome has finally stopped needing witnesses, and you can rest.
All right, we're deep into the part of the night where thoughts no longer line up neatly. That's good. This section is less about events and more about atmosphere. Rome is no longer a noun. It's a tint. By now, Rome has settled into the background of human life the way sky color does. You know it's there. You don't think about it. It just quietly frames everything else. This is what happens when something lasts long enough.
It stops feeling historical and starts feeling natural. Roman ideas didn't survive because people admired them. They survived because people forgot they were Roman at all. Take roads. Not the grand, straight highways of textbooks, just paths people use because they're already there. A farmer walks a road built centuries earlier and never wonders who laid the stones. A trader follows a route because it's the easiest way, not because it once connected provinces. Rome becomes convenience. Law works the same way. Rules persist because they're useful, not because they're respected. A contract is honored because it keeps peace. Property boundaries are enforced because arguments are tiring. Roman law outlives Roman authority because it reduces friction. And friction, like noise, is something people instinctively avoid. This is Rome at its most successful. Not admired, not remembered, used, but quietly. The same goes for governance, local councils, records, titles. Even when kingdoms replace empires, they borrow Roman habits, writing things down, categorizing people, taxing predictably. Rome taught the world how to be administratively boring, which is an achievement. Boring systems last. Charismatic leaders come and go, exciting reforms collapse, but boring routines keep working long after anyone cares who invented them. Rome fades into routine, and routine is soothing. That's why Rome feels calm at this stage of the story. There's no ambition left, no urgency. The empire once rushed constantly. Now it moves at the speed of daily life. Slow, repetitive, familiar. Even the memory of Rome becomes routine. School lessons, standard comparisons, casual references. Like Rome, just like the Romans. Phrases lose their sharpness when repeated enough. Eventually, they stop meaning anything specific. Rome becomes shorthand, then background, then silence. This isn't decay, it's digestion. History absorbs what it can use and discards the rest. Rome offered a lot. Not all of it was taken, but enough was. The rest sinks quietly. That's why Rome doesn't feel tragic at the end. Tragedy requires awareness. Rome's ending lacks witnesses. No one is watching closely anymore. No one is taking notes. Life has moved on to other concerns. Weather, food, local problems. The empire once tried to solve everything from the center. Now solutions are small again, human-sized, which feels manageable. So here, in this long, quiet stretch, Rome is no longer heavy. It doesn't loom, it doesn't warn, it doesn't instruct. It just colors the edges of things. A word here, a rule there. Nothing demanding attention. And that's why this part is easy to stay in. No plot to follow, no climax approaching, just continuation. If your thoughts drift now, that's fine. They're supposed to. Rome has finished asking to be understood. It's content to be absorbed. And absorption is silent. So we stay here a moment longer. Not to learn, not to conclude, just to let the background settle into place. Rome has become the color of the walls, the shape of the room. You don't need to look at it anymore. It's already there. And it always will be. All right, we're reaching the kind of quiet where even distance stops having meaning. Not because Rome is close, but because it's so far away that far doesn't really apply anymore. At this point, Rome isn't somewhere you go. It's somewhere things came from, and origins, once they're old enough, stop feeling specific. They blur. If you asked most people living centuries after Rome ended what Rome was, you'd get vague answers. A great power, an old empire, something important, probably. But details wouldn't matter. They wouldn't need to. Rome had crossed that threshold where knowing more didn't change anything. That's when history becomes inert. Think about how children learn words they don't fully understand yet. They use them correctly anyway. Meaning comes later, if it ever does. That's Rome now, a word that functions without explanation, a reference point no one checks anymore. You don't need to know how Rome worked to live inside its leftovers, you just do. And that's peaceful. The empire once needed constant reaffirmation, ceremonies, laws, public displays. Now it survives without reinforcement. No upkeep, no maintenance, just residual shape. Cities follow Roman layouts without meaning to. Governments inherit Roman habits without noticing. Languages carry Roman roots without recognition. Rome becomes structural, and structures are quiet. They don't announce themselves. They don't argue. They hold things up. This is the final comfort Rome offers. Not guidance, not warning, support. Something underneath that doesn't ask to be seen. The Romans themselves would probably hate this. They loved recognition, honor, memory. They carved names into stone because they were afraid of being forgotten. And here they are, forgotten in the most complete way possible. Not erased, absorbed, which is kinder than it sounds. Erasure hurts. Absorption just happens. So when we say Rome is gone, what we really mean is that it no longer stands apart. It no longer insists on being Rome. It's blended into everything else, which makes it hard to point to, hard to define, and very easy to live with. That's why this part of the story feels weightless. There's no responsibility attached, no lessons to carry forward, no parallels to draw, just continuity without commentary. Rome once demanded loyalty. Now it asks nothing, and that's the deepest rest it could ever have. So if you're barely listening now, that's fine. If words are passing through without sticking, that's ideal. This isn't information anymore. It's tone, a low, steady hum, the sound of something ancient finally letting go. No more names, no more timelines, just time itself, moving on without checking back. Rome is no longer behind you, it's beneath you, supporting, unnoticed, and you don't need to think about it. Just let the quiet hold. There's nowhere left to go, nothing left to resolve, only rest.